Hello, everybody. LC Holt here, and this is my update for the last week of February.
Leap year!
Tell you what, we're going to be talking today about something quite interesting. Movies that both she and I grew up with. Poltergeist.
Yes. Did you pick Leap Day specifically for this?
No, I did not.
I don't know. I thought spooky film, Leap Day.
No, I didn't.
Okay.
But we're going to definitely be talking about some spooky films and some spooky things that happened around those films, because Poltergeist, as many of you horror fans probably know, is allegedly cursed. Why is it cursed? Because a lot of people died. We're averaging about one person per film, and there were 3 films, and we're going to talk about all 3 of those films today. First, we're going to jump in and talk about how this whole Poltergeist idea came to be. It was an idea that Steven Spielberg had while he was directing Raiders of the Lost Ark. And whatever downtime he had, he started reminiscing about his past and his childhood growing up in the suburbs with his parents. And he thought, well, some of these memories might be interesting to put into a film. But he wanted to make, a commercial film out of it, something that would be interesting for people to watch. And so he came up with this idea called Night Skies. And Night Skies was going to be about a suburban family terrorized by malevolent aliens that attack their neighborhood.
I was actually going to make a joke, could we tie in and say that she was like Indiana Jones's grandchild?
Who's that?
The kid from.
Oh, no, yeah, I don't know. But
it's a bad joke. I'm sorry.
But so
aliens.
Night Skies, he wanted someone to start developing Night Skies while he was working on Raiders of the Lost Ark. And it just so happened that Harrison Ford, star, Jones, his wife was a screenwriter, a woman named Melissa Matheson. So he gave Melissa Matheson his basic, very general idea for Night Skies and had her work on it while he was directing Raiders of the Lost Ark, with the idea being maybe there'll be a script ready when this film is done and I can go into production on this next thing, Night Skies. Well, what part of the story elements of Night Skies was there was going to be a subplot involving an autistic boy who becomes friendly with the only nice alien in the malevolent bunch attacking this neighborhood. And Melissa Matheson really clung on to that idea of the autistic boy and the nice alien. And so she wanted to emphasize that. And so as she was writing, Night Skies lightened up from being a scary movie to being a script that she titled E.T. and Me, and was eventually made into a film called E.T. the Extraterrestrial, which is not scary. And Steven Spielberg liked what she did with the script, even though she had just taken one element out of Night Skies and made a lighter film or a lighter screenplay based on that one element. He liked the script that she produced, and he wound up directing E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Now, he was not done, though, with the idea of doing a dark film. And so he came up with this concept of, what if we did the dark version as well as the light version? The suburban dream and the suburban nightmare was sort of his idea. So instead of abandoning Night Skies altogether, what he decided to do was he decided to make a second film concurrent to E.T. And that film would be about malevolent ghosts terrorizing a suburban family instead of malevolent aliens. And so he hired a couple of screenwriters, Michael Grace and Mark Victor, to work on the dark version while Melissa Matheson was working on the bright version. And they produced a script called Poltergeist, which Spielberg also contributed to the screenplay for. He actually has a co-writing credit on Poltergeist, because a lot of his childhood memories wound up in Poltergeist. Some wound up in E.T. as well. But Poltergeist, he always tells the story about the house he grew up in. Outside the window was this really gnarly tree. And that when it would get dark and it would, start to rain, the limbs of this tree would scratch his window. And the lightning would flash, and it would make the tree look like a shadow monster outside his bedroom window. And it said as a kid, it terrorized him, this tree. And so he put that into the Poltergeist script, along with some other things. The problem with this was that he chose to direct E.T. And since he wanted the two movies to be made concurrently, he couldn't direct both
at the
same time.
I agree with you.
Yes, we're going to do a little quote there. And also, there was an impending Directors Guild of America strike.
Yeah.
So there was some question of whether if he could finish E.T. and then also direct Poltergeist. So he decided to hire someone to direct, air quotes, Poltergeist. And who he hired...
We'll just do them together.
Yes. Poltergeist. And who he hired was a guy who had directed a very well-known movie called Texas Chainsaw Massacre, a very much, not really well-known movie. Movie fans said it's an awesome movie. I very much agree. Talking about Poltergeist over on the chat. He directed a movie called Eaten Alive, which was one of the first movies Robert Englund, the future Freddy Krueger, appeared in. And Tobe Hooper had also directed a movie called The Funhouse. So at this point, Tobe had directed quite a few movies.
We hadn't gotten to
what?
Naked Vampire Girl.
Life Force. No, that's after this. So Tobe is who Steven Spielberg hired to direct this movie about the evil ghosts.
Yes.
In fact, I was telling you this was concurrent. Well, auditions were held for both E.T. and Poltergeist at the same time. Sort of like how George Lucas and Brian De Palma held auditions for Star Wars and Carrie at the same time. And a lot of the people auditioned for both movies. And they either got a part in one or the other. For instance, a little girl named Heather O'Rourke auditioned for the part of Gertie in E.T., but wound up getting the part of the little girl Carol Ann in Poltergeist. And this was the same for some of the adult actors as well. Ultimately, the people they wound up with for Poltergeist were Craig T. Nelson, who played the father of the Freeling family.
I was going to say he was Coach.
He was Coach, yeah. He was Coach Freeling. Steve Freeling, who was the father. Jo Beth Williams, a very good actress, was cast as his wife, Diane. And she was the mother of the three children, who were... Dominique Dunn was cast as the oldest girl, a teenage girl named Dana. Oliver Robbins, a very funny-looking kid, was cast as Robbie, who was the middle child. And the youngest child in the Freeling family, as I said before, was Drew Barrymore. No, that was she got Gertie. It was Heather O'Rourke. And so that's the Freeling family. There were some other characters who had to be cast, such as Tangina, who is written in the script as a psychic dwarf. She's brought into the house to help exorcise it. She's clairvoyant. She was cast with an actress named Zelda Rubinstein, who actually got a lot of work after Poltergeist.
Well, I was going to say.
Because remember Picket Fences? Yeah. She was on Picket Fences. She was on a number of other movies. And she's also one of the few actresses that stayed the long haul through the three Poltergeist films. Now, another thing Steven Spielberg based from his childhood was Steven Spielberg, he was afraid of clowns. Many of you probably have that same reaction. From what I understand, a lot of people are afraid of these damn clowns. I myself have no particular problem with them. What about you?
No, I watched Bozo growing up.
I did too. And
throwing the little ball in the bucket.
Throwing the ball in the bucket.
Bite.
That was a big time deal for me. Bozo and his little pal.
That's
I don't remember
right.
what the pal's name was.
The orange Bob.
Yeah, with the orange hair. But anyway, Spielberg was afraid of clowns, and he put into the Poltergeist script the idea of this clown doll that's in the little boy, the funny looking boy's bedroom, and it comes to life and tries to strangle him. Do you remember that scene?
Yes.
Very famous scene, which is pretty creepy, even without the clowns, because anytime you have, but you see the movie Poltergeist and you see the doll sitting over in the chair and you go, what parent would leave that in the bedroom of their two youngest children? Because Heather O'Rourke, remember, she shared a bed with, I mean, not bed, but she shared a bedroom with them. Right. They weren't that poor. Now, one of the things that we can talk about with Poltergeist real quick is the directorship. There is a lot, because we keep doing the air quotes of Tobe Hooper directed this movie. Well, it looks like bunny ears attacking each other. But the reason we're doing that...
Steven Spielberg and...
Yeah, and Tobe Hooper.
They're fighting it.
And Tobe Hooper's smoking weed, and he's like...
Yes, and he wants to add extra things to the film.
Tobe Hooper loved to smoke that weed. In fact, Zelda Rubinstein criticized him for that. She said that she did not appreciate her director having chemical substances in his body.
Is that why he was his directing style was
as erratic as it was? Yeah. Well, and I'm going to talk about that here in a second. But I
don't want to, insult, pot smoking.
But, no, that's fine.
But he must have gotten some bad stuff.
Yeah.
Something laced.
Well, this is probably not going to be the most popular opinion, but I'm going to say it anywhere because I have to be kind of honest. I'm not a huge Tobe Hooper fan.
Dun, dun, dun!
I think Tobe Hooper did a great movie with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
You didn't love Life Force.
I did not.
Where it went from vampires to zombies at the end.
Zombies because they couldn't afford to make the cool vampire creatures anymore, so they just made a bunch of zombie-looking people.
Yeah.
No, because Tobe Hooper, I don't think was a tremendously great storyteller. I think that Tobe Hooper shot his wad with Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I think he made his one great movie. And then went through the rest of his career sort of gliding on that and getting and getting a lot of jobs.
He shot his wad and
glided on his wad, straight down like a figure skate. And with a cigar in one hand and a joint in the other.
Wacky weed in the other, as my mom used to call it.
That's right. No, I don't think if you look at Poltergeist and then you look at something like Life Force, which you bring up, and some other films, you can tell the difference. One of them is a very controlled 3-act structure.
Yes.
Quality. It's a story from beginning to end. I'm sorry, but it is. Poltergeist has a great. You can tell that this is a Steven Spielberg story.
Yes.
Tobe Hooper's story generally went like this: crazy sequence that doesn't make sense, and then the last 20 minutes, everybody goes crazy. Roll credits.
And it's not even like you feel like you're watching a different movie.
Yeah, every time you get a different movie, it's like very disjointed. Whatever interesting idea, I would relate it to like Robert Rodriguez. Robert Rodriguez puts a bunch of cool shit in his movie, but if you look back and think about it at the end, it's like none of that shit really synced up with each other. None of those, yes, within the sequences, they're cool. But if you look at how they all connect, it just feels unbalanced. It doesn't feel like it fits together as a movie. And that was Tobe Hooper's thing. I had a few people who produced for him. They were huge fans of Tobe Hooper prior to producing for him.
But it probably worked a little bit better for old Robert than...
Who? Robert Englund?
No, Robert Rodriguez.
Oh, yeah, Robert Rodriguez. He's fine. Yeah, but Tobe Hooper, the thing about Tobe Hooper is I had a few friends that produced for him, and it just didn't, they were huge fans before, and they weren't after because they were like, Tobe asked for weird shit. Like, Tobe just... He doesn't look at the script. He's just over there coming up with crazy ideas and hoping it's all going to fit together. And a lot of times,
does it for the payday now, or do you think?
Well, he's dead now.
Well, I mean, you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, I don't. I think he did it for he had a career as a director, and he kept getting jobs, even though he was fired from a lot of jobs.
Yeah.
Particularly around the time of pre-Poltergeist. Yeah. So Spielberg really helped him out. Now, I can't. It sounds like I'm really shitting on Tobe Hooper, but let me just say I do think Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a masterpiece.
But could you? Now, the real curse of Poltergeist is the person that hired him after Poltergeist, thinking that he had directed
Poltergeist,
and then they got what they got.
You got Life Force, which is like, what the fuck is this? Like, Poltergeist is one thing. Life Force is Tobe.
I keep bringing. I just trying to find any way to bring up Life Force.
Well, maybe we'll do a whole show on Life Force at one point, but. Let me jump in there back with Poltergeist because I wanted to talk a little bit about some of what people said about Tobe Hooper and Steven Spielberg. There were people who were very much Team Spielberg. They said that Spielberg was on the set constantly and was calling the creative shots. Zelda Rubinstein was one of them. She's the one that played Tangina. Mm-hmm. John Leonetti, who was the first assistant cameraman who was on the set all the time, he actually said that there were very few exceptions when Spielberg was not on the set. He said if there were a few days Tobe Hooper was left, but the rest of the time Spielberg was always there and calling the shots. Tobe would set up the framing, and even Spielberg himself said that the film was, as he says, a collaboration.
Now, You said he was filming E.T. at the same time. How is he juggling this?
I don't know. I think they're filming fairly close to each other, and I don't think they were concurrent in so much as they were shooting at the same time. But you couldn't direct both supposedly at the same time. It was like one was in post, one was shooting.
It's sort of like Back to the Future 2 and 3.
Yes, it's all happening very close together because we have to remember Poltergeist and E.T. came out a week apart in what they called the Summer of Spielberg, June of 1983. So these things were happening at the same time. Spielberg, there's some evidence of Spielberg being on the set, in fact, because one scene in the movie where paranormal investigators come into the Freeling's house, a man goes off. It's a great scene where he goes off into the kitchen and he starts to hallucinate from the ghost that the food is rotten, and he looks at himself in the mirror and his face starts to boil up and fall off, and he reaches up and starts pulling his own face off. Well, the hands reaching up are Spielberg's hands, because he wanted to make sure that the guy, he didn't want the actor not to mess up the appliance. And he knew how he wanted it to look, how he wanted the face to come off. So if you look at that scene, those hands that reach up and rip off the flesh are Spielberg's. So we know he was on set for that. Mick Garris, though, he was a famous director later. He was a publicist on Poltergeist Part 1. And he said he was Team Toby. He did say that Toby did all the pre-production work, though Spielberg did all the storyboards.
It sounds like a Twilight novel.
What? How's that?
Team Toby, Team Spielberg.
Right, Team Spielberg.
Did they have like little shirts that said that on set?
Probably not. Oliver Robbins, who played the little boy, he was Team Toby too. He said that Toby had always directed him in all the scenes. He said it was always Toby. Now, as I said, Zelda Rubinstein, who played Tangina, she said she was on set for 6 days, and those 6 days was every day she was directed by Spielberg. So it just depends on who you want to believe. You know, I personally, you probably know from the rant I did prior, where I stand on this, the movie is too damn good to have been directed by Tobe Hooper by himself. Now,
I tend to agree with you.
Yes, because you've seen Tobe Hooper movies and you've seen this.
You forced me to watch some of them, yes.
So the question is, do you think that Tobe Hooper just out of the blue made one great movie? We're leaving Texas Chainsaw aside. That is a great movie. But that aside, after that, you think Tobe Hooper just happened to direct one great movie and direct a series of stinkers before and after? I find that hard.
Why didn't Spielberg just go, dude, I'm doing the work, dude, I'm putting my name on it?
Well, I don't know. There was actually a little controversy about that because Spielberg said in the press that it was a collaboration between the two of them, and the Directors Guild at that time wasn't really keen on having two directors credited for a movie. So Spielberg actually had to pay a fine and sort of apologize and just say, well, I'm going to give this to Toby. So I think that it probably was a collaboration in so much as Spielberg made the creative decisions and Toby set up the shots.
I was going to say, Toby set up the camera.
Yeah. And I'll give you this. There are some shots in this movie in terms of lens choices, in terms of lighting, in terms of color of lighting, very Tobe Hooper. I will definitely say that.
Okay, I was going to say, maybe he should have just been a cinematographer.
I don't know. I mean, and we're going to stop picking on Toby.
Poor
because,
Toby.
Rest his soul.
Rest his
And we also have to say that Toby was in the editing room for the 10 weeks they were editing this movie. Spielberg was busy on post-production for E.T., so he wasn't in the editing room. So we know Toby was assisting with the editing. Jerry Goldsmith did the score. Great score. Carol Ann's theme is the main theme of the movie, which is fantastic. Everyone knows that theme. This was originally rated R, this movie, mainly because the guy's face falling off and other scary things. But Spielberg, as he usually did at this point, went into the ratings board and said, "You're not giving my movie an R." And this was pre Temple of Doom.
Okay,
so there was no PG-13. And so eventually after appeal, they got it reduced to a PG, which is how the movie was released.
It's not a PG.
It's a pretty scary PG movie, but it was a PG movie. Now, I want to go ahead and talk about the first thing that happened to a cast member. As I said, the eldest daughter was played by an actress named Dominique Dunne. Dominique Dunne was born in November of 1956. Her father was a famous television producer, writer, and actor sometimes named Dominique Dunne. And actually her godmother was Gary Cooper's daughter.
Wow.
So she was in the Hollywood community, and this probably helped her get roles in the 70s in TV shows like Breaking Away, Heart to Heart, Fame, stuff like that. Poltergeist was her first feature film. And so her career was on the rise. Now, in 1981, keep in mind, Poltergeist came out in 82. She met a guy named John Sweeney, who was a sous chef for a restaurant in Los Angeles. And he wooed her for a couple of weeks, and I'm sure it was a young love thing. She fell for him hard, and within a month, they moved into a one-bedroom house together and started living together. Unfortunately, he was very jealous. He was very possessive. This led to physical abuse. There were a couple incidents in 1982, just prior to the film's release, in which he attacked her. One time in particular, he grabbed her and ripped fistfuls of hair out of her as she was trying to get away from him. She managed to get away, go to her mother's house, call the police. John Sweeney came to her mother's house, tried to get in, banging on the doors and the windows. And the mother said, "You got to get out of here." And he left. The problem was, after a few days, Dominique Dunne returned to their house and tried to work it out with him. Well, it wasn't a month later in 82, September of 82, Sweeney tried to strangle her in their bedroom. And they had a house guest staying with them at the time. She heard noises of a struggle from another room, ran in there, and interrupted John Sweeney strangling his girlfriend, Dominique Dunne. Well, Dominique Dunne managed to get him away from her, and he was apologizing, saying, "I wasn't trying to kill you," and all this. And Dominique was like, "Okay, I forgive you. I forgive you." And she said that long enough to get into the bathroom, lock the door, and go out the window. And she got in her car and she started driving away, screaming this, "He's trying to kill me. He was trying to kill me." Sweeney jumped on the hood of the car, and she got out of there anyway. And that was the end of the relationship in her mind. The police came, they took Sweeney out of the house. And once he was gone from their house, which actually was her house, she moved back in. Now, a month after that, in October of 82, she was in the living room rehearsing a scene from the TV show V, which she had been cast in, with an actor who was in that show called David Packer. They were rehearsing lines for a scene they were going to shoot the next day. When she was talking, and during this, she was talking on the phone to a female friend. Well, John Sweeney asked the operator to cut in on the call. And Dominique Dunne said, "Oh God, it's Sweeney. Let me get him off the phone." And, and a few minutes later, after she hung up, he showed up at the house. And Dominique decided to go outside and talk to him for a second. While she was out there, David Packard, the actor, was inside. He heard sounds of an argument, and then he heard some banging around. And so he called the police. And he told the police, "I think my friend is being attacked by her boyfriend." Well, the police said, "You're not in our jurisdiction." So I guess that means you're shit out of luck. And so then David Packard called a friend of his, and he told his friend, "Listen, something crazy is going on. If I die tonight, the person who did it was John Sweeney." And then Packard went outside. And by the time he got outside, Sweeney was on top of Dominique Dunne. And he told Packard to call the police because he thinks he killed her. Well, finally, the police managed to show up.
Oh, now they're in their jurisdiction.
Yeah, finally, they fucking show up. And when they get there, Sweeney met him in the driveway and said he killed his girlfriend. Well, Dominique Dunne had been strangled to the point of brain death. She was put into a hospital, and not long after her 23rd birthday, on November 4th, they had to take her off life support. Now, here's the kicker. John Sweeney was found guilty on voluntary manslaughter. He received 6 years for strangling with his bare hands his girlfriend, which, if that is justice, you tell me. Guess how many years he actually served?
Probably half that.
3 years. John Sweeney got out of prison after 3 years for strangling his girlfriend to death with his bare hands. Dominique Dunne, the father, became a victims' right advocate. And he was very instrumental. He wrote many books. He actually kept an eye on John Sweeney because at one point, a father from Florida called up Dominic Dunne and said, John Sweeney, the man that you wrote the book about who murdered your daughter, do you know where he's living? And Dominic said, I'm not sure at the moment. And the guy said, well, I think he's dating my daughter. And Dominic actually hired a private investigator to go down there and watch out for that girl.
Wow.
And he paid for all this, and he had that guy also follow Sweeney around. And eventually he decided that he was wasting his life in pursuing this guy, and he had to move on with his life. And he became a victims' right advocate during the O.J. Simpson trial. Dominic Dunne sat there and held the Goldman's hand throughout the whole proceedings. He was I think he did a lot of great things. He himself died in August of 2009. But that is the story of Dominique Dunne, who played Dana in the original Poltergeist, who sadly died way too young before her time. And unfortunately, justice was miscarried in the case.
Where is the jerk face?
Sweeney moved to the Pacific Northwest and changed his name. Now, I don't know if he's still alive, so I won't tell you what he changed his name to, but it's pretty easy to find. But yeah, he lived on after that, which is a shame. Not to be a bummer or anything. Let's jump back into Poltergeist. The first Poltergeist made $122 million. So MGM instantly greenlit a sequel. And it was going to be going to be written by the same guys who wrote the original one. It was going to be called Poltergeist: The Other Side. This time, Spielberg was not interested in directing it, and neither was Tobe Hooper, apparently. Brian Gibson directed it. Jerry Goldsmith returned to do the score, which is basically like the same thing he did on the first
This
movie.
is the one where the cast came back, pretty much.
Yes, the whole family came back. Craig T. Nelson, Jo Beth Williams, Oliver Robbins, and Heather O'Rourke as Carol Ann. There were some new additions. Will Sampson played a shaman, a Native American shaman named Taylor, and a man named Julian Beck, who was an interesting guy. Julian Beck co-founded in New York a company called the Living Theater with his life partner, a woman named Judith Molina. And they were together for many years, but they had what you might call an open relationship. They were a couple of hippie anarchists. They loved it. They were Greenwich Village people all the way. They didn't like paying taxes and stuff. They were like, screw the government and all this. Real groovy type folks, right? They had a couple of kids together. But on top of being a poet, an anarchist, a theater actor and director, he also was a film actor who had appeared in movies like 9.5 Weeks, The Cotton Club, stuff like that. Julian Beck was cast in Poltergeist 2 as Dr. Henry Kane, who was a reverend and evil cult leader who had deceived it was sort of like a Jonestown thing. He had deceived this group of people who were his followers into going underground and in a cavern killing themselves. Well, it comes to find out, in the original Poltergeist, there is a character that is unseen for the most part, except for one shot, called the Beast. And the Beast is the evil ghost leading all of the rest of them in terrorizing the Freeling family. Well, what you find out in Poltergeist 2 is that Henry Kane, played by Julian Beck, is the Beast. He was the evil entity that was trying to get at Carol Ann.
Oh.
Because what you discover in the second film is the family moves in Phoenix, Arizona with Diane's mom, who would be Carol Ann's grandmother, Grandma Jess. Well, you find out Grandma Jess is a clairvoyant, and she passed the ability on to Diane. And Diane has passed the ability on to Carol Ann.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason that these ghosts are trying to get at this kid is because they think this kid is their way into the afterlife because they're trapped. So that's why they're trying to get at Carol Ann. So as we had discussed before, you were talking to me before we went on the show about how Poltergeist 1 and 2 sort of bleed into one another.
I know, because we were talking about, I was like, wasn't that, because I'm going to be honest, I haven't seen them in a long time.
Yeah.
And then you were like, no, that was 2, but yeah. And I was like, okay, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
They do kind of.
They bleed into each other in a cool way. And I think partly because maybe they have the same screenwriters.
Uh-huh.
And partly because they're both really good.
Yeah.
Like, I rewatched Poltergeist 2, The Other Side, not long ago, getting ready for this show, and I was really struck by how good it is.
Yeah.
I still prefer the original. I don't know if you needed a sequel, but if you're going to do a sequel, at least do one like this.
Yeah.
Which expands on the story, tells, like, it reveals things like that the Reverend Cain was the beast and stuff like that. It just sort of creates a little more of a texture to stuff we learned in the first one. Zelda Rubinstein returned as Tangina in the sequel. As I said, she's the only, other than Heather O'Rourke, she's the only actress who was in the entire trilogy. And it's kind of interesting because at one point Grandma Jess dies in Poltergeist 2, and she contacts Carol Ann through the phone, the little kitty phone. Mm-hmm. And so she's trying to tell her daughter that it's all right, because a lot of the film in terms of Carol Ann is about death. The death isn't something to be afraid of. And that, if you get trapped in between, that doesn't necessarily mean you're evil. It just means that you're trying to make your way into the light, to the other side, And so it does have that kind of a heart to it.
Yeah.
And then, you have characters like Cain, who was evil in life. I mean, he was a cruel cult leader who led a mass suicide. So him being a ghost didn't make him evil. It was just he was a fucking asshole to begin with. Julian Beck plays him wonderfully. Now, Julian Beck, prior to the shooting of this movie, he was diagnosed with stomach cancer in 1983. And, he lived for 2 years with stomach cancer, but he physically started to deteriorate. And the reason Cain has such a striking look in Poltergeist 2 is because the actor playing him is dying. In fact, he was on his last legs. He died before they finished the movie. He died right after they finished filming it. So when you see him in the movie, it's striking because you can tell this is a guy that's very ill. And some of the time, some of the set people and some of the actors were talking about how creepy it was when he was on set doing some of the scenes he had to do. And the one they constantly point out is a very creepy scene in the movie where Carol Ann, the little girl, is out on the lawn, and it's raining in the middle of the day. And the sun's still out. And you see Cain walking down the street singing and in the rain. And he walks up to the little girl and he starts talking to her. And they know something's up with this old man talking to their daughter. And they go outside and they grab Carol Ann and they pull her inside and they shut the screen, and Craig T. Nelson is talking to Cain through the screen. And there's a scene where Cain steps forward and gets right up into the camera and screams, "You're all going to die in there." And when he does that, it's very chilling. And they said on the set it was even more chilling because it was being delivered by somebody who was literally dying at the time when he delivered the line. And it's a pretty creepy performance, I must say. I think Julian Beck will be well remembered for his performance as the evil Cain in Poltergeist 2. There's some other really interesting scenes. There's a scene in the movie where Craig T. Nelson, this poor father, he thought he'd gotten his family away from this crazy shit because the house got eaten alive in the first movie at the end of it. And now, and he has some hilarious scenes in this as the father, because sometimes their reactions are very honest, but it's played for a sort of humor. Because that's like one scene where the little girl says they're back, and Craig T. Nelson's like, "Okay, get everything and let's get out of here." And they're all running to the car and they meet Will Sampson and he's like, "Hello, I'm Taylor," and Craig T. Nelson's like, "Yeah, good name. Okay, get in the car." Yeah. But there's a scene where he gets drunk on tequila. He's like, "I've had enough of this shit." And Steve starts getting drunk, and he swallows the worm at the bottom of the tequila bottle. And it's possessed by Cain, and it starts growing out of his mouth. And there's this, and Craig T. Nelson they actually had to put that appliance up inside his mouth and have it come out. And it was apparently a very uncomfortable
I was going to say, I mean, getting impressions made of your, teeth at the dentist or orthodontist is pretty uncomfortable.
Yes. And imagine having to shove a piece of foam.
Your gag reflex.
And then you have this foam thing growing out of your throat, and you have to hold it in your mouth so it'll grow up out of you. I mean, it's pretty nasty. It's very scary in the movie. It works well.
Physical effects.
That's right. And hey, you remember a guy, you may have heard of this guy we've talked about on about a billion shows now, named H.R. Giger.
Oh, yes.
H.R. Tubes. H.R. Tubes Giger. Well, he didn't create a tube for this movie.
Did he do the band, The Tubes?
No, he didn't do that.
Okay.
I put more emphasis in the tubes than I think he did.
The tubes, yeah. Well, okay.
Yeah. But he designed the evil cane that appears as the Beast in the astral plane at the very end of the movie.
Okay.
And the reason it looks kind of geegery is because it is geegery. It's straight H.R. Giger. He was not particularly happy with how it come out in the film. But he wasn't on the set, so he said I wasn't there to supervise it.
Every time you say his name, I always think of maybe that could be like a tool that the ghost hunters would use.
Oh, an H.R. Giger?
An H.R. Giger.
Let's see. What is this? What does our Giger say today?
What does the Giger say about the Poltergeist? Ooh, we're bringing it together.
Tangina has her Giger. There was another kind of apocryphal story from the set. At the end, they actually go down into Cain's pit, which is where everyone committed suicide, and their skeletons are still down there. Well, they used actual skeletons that they had gotten from medical resource places. And they said that when you would go on the set of this with all these real skeletons laying around, you'd get a really creepy feeling.
Well, I'm sure you did.
Yeah.
I mean, they couldn't get...
So this added to the lure of the Poltergeist Curse.
We're just instead of getting prop skeletons.
Yeah, no plastic skeletons.
We're going to go to the graveyard and dig some folks up and throw them around.
All the skeletons in that damn place were real. And they said this creepy feeling had to be to alleviate the cast and crew. They went in there and they did an exorcism of this pit.
Which probably stirred something up.
Probably made it even worse.
Because it was probably like that episode of, was it A Haunting? Where the guy had the Ouija board. Yes. And they did a Ouija board thing, and then stuff started going crazy. So he had the bright idea, well, to shut it down, I'm just going to go burn it in my barbecue.
Yeah, burn the Ouija board. That'll work.
I remember when he did that, I was going, what are you doing? You never burn a Ouija board.
Next thing you know, Captain Howdy's strangling you.
That's right.
But this movie was a success. It wasn't as huge a success as it made $40 million, which ain't too bad.
No, and particularly since sequels back then, they weren't they usually didn't make as much as the first film.
And this was in '86.
Yeah.
So $40 million in '86 is nothing to scoff about. No. As I said, Julian Beck passed away before the movie came out. Another actor who played, Taylor, good name, Runaway to the Car, Will Sampson, he had suffered for many years with a heart, lung, and skin disorder, which caused a lot of physical problems. In fact, at one point, he had lost 120 pounds. So from this ailment, he needed to have a heart and lung transplant if he was going to survive any further.
And how long had he been sick?
For as long as he was alive.
As long as he's alive. Yeah. So you really can't blame that on a curse.
No. And he was
the guy that had the cancer.
And he was no, you can't really blame that. He was 53. Julian Beck was 60 when he died of stomach cancer. Will Sampson was 53. He went to Houston and he had a heart and lung transplant, which seemed to go well. But as is generally the case with some of these procedures, especially something as intense as that, there were complications. He basically died of post-op kidney failure. And so this was after the film was released and everything, but people pointed out because he was in the movie.
Well, I can't point those out.
Yes. I mean, these were things that just sort of happened.
Yeah.
I mean, Dominique Dunn was something that was a horrific murder that should never have happened to someone so young.
I mean, when I think of like curses, I think like, Curse of Superman.
Yeah.
That kind of,
Yeah.
George Reeves.
But I think the reason that when we're about to get into Poltergeist 3, we'll go ahead and jump into that. Poltergeist 2 was a success, as I said. And so 2 years later, they were pretty keen on doing another one.
And this is where the curse is, the third one.
All of them.
Really. No, I'm talking about because it's a bad movie.
Oh, yeah, it is a terrible movie. Writer-director Gary Sherman was brought in when the original writers did not want to come back. We've already lost Toby. We've lost Stephen, the two directors of part one, bunny ears. And now we bring in Gary Sherman, who was going to write and direct.
And we lose the entire family, too.
The whole cast went away. Nobody wanted to come back for part three, except for Heather O'Rourke, who played Carol Ann, and Zelda Rubinstein, who played Tangina.
That's right.
They're
gonna ride this horse out.
That's right. But the good thing with Heather O'Rourke is this made her the star. Carol Ann really is the star of Poltergeist 3. She's front and center because she's the only one returning. Tom Skerritt.
He could fences.
And with Zelda Rubinstein.
That's why I brought it up.
This was the first thing they worked on together prior to that, because he joined the cast as Bruce, who is a Chicago building manager. Nancy Allen, very great actress, played his wife Patricia, who is Diane's sister. So we're going through Diane's whole family throughout this series. And Laura Flynn Boyle, in one of her earliest roles, played their daughter, Donna.
Donna.
And Carol Ann, for some reason, is sent away from. This is the thing that makes no sense. Her family was so protective of her. They were so close-knit. They knew that she was always in danger because she was such a strong
why would you?
She was such a strong clairvoyant that all these ghosts are trying to get her help to go to the other side. So what do? Well, you just send her away.
She needs a vacation.
So
Let's give her a break.
They sent her to Chicago. And Gary Sherman's his idea.
Let her meet some new ghosts.
There you go, and she does. Gary Sherman's idea, sort of. Gary Sherman's idea was, okay, the first two took place in suburbia. Well, the city can be scary too, because you're living in a high-rise building, and there's no guarantee the person on the other side of that wall cares anything about you being in trouble. And so that was his emphasis about setting this film in the John Hancock building in Chicago. Which in the movie is the building that Bruce manages. And he also lives there with his family. And Carol Ann is the new addition to the family. Now, the thing about it is he was also inspired by Through the Looking Glass. And watching the movie, you can definitely see where that inspiration came into play, because there's a lot of mirror action in Poltergeist 3. These ghosts are coming in and out of mirrors. People are falling in and out of mirrors. All kinds of crazy shit going on with mirrors. But Gary Sherman, I'll give him this. He wanted all the effects to be on set. And that's something about Poltergeist 3. Every single effect you see in the movie was produced actually, not even with opticals. The only optical in the movie is at the very end where the lightning bolt strikes the John Hancock Tower. Other than that, everything you see was on the set.
Physical.
Very, cloak and dagger. We're going to do it the old magician style. In camera. Now, the problem as they were starting to shoot the movie was that Heather O'Rourke was starting to have some health issues. That's the little girl, Carol Ann. She was suffering from some flu-like symptoms. And eventually, they diagnosed her with Crohn's disease. In order to combat the effects of Crohn's disease, they gave her cortisone shots, which caused her cheeks to be a little puffy. It caused her cheeks to puff. And if you watch the movie, she looks different than she did in the first two. And the reason for that is it's a pretty common reaction to having, regular cortisone shots, as her cheeks started to kind of puff up a little bit. But being a trooper, she went forward anyway. She was going to be the star of Poltergeist 3. And so moving forward, they began shooting in June of 1987, I believe, on Poltergeist 3. Or 1988, I'm sorry, on Poltergeist 3. But there were some complications along the way. One of the main ones was, after they shot the movie, they decided that they didn't like the ending. And so they were going to reshoot the ending. They had actually already sent it to the ratings board and got a PG on the movie. But for some reason, they did not like the ending of Poltergeist 3, the producers. And so they decided, we're going to try it again. And even if it affects our rating, we're going to do, So this was after the film was wrapped. They decided to do this. The problem was they took a couple of months at the end of 87, I think it was, to retool the ending, to prepare for a reshoot. And that reshoot was going to happen in February. Mm-hmm. Well, before the reshoot happened in January, Heather O'Rourke collapsed in her home right as she was getting ready to go back to the set of Poltergeist 3. And her mother rushed her to the hospital. And what they determined was that she was suffering from an acute cardiac arrest brought on by septic shock. Mm-hmm. And so they had to do emergency surgery on her. And as they were doing the surgery, after several hours of the surgery, she died on the operating table. Unfortunately, she was only 12 years old when she died. It was a very freak sort of thing. A lot of doctors after the fact looked at it and were like, this is so unusual that this would happen just out of nowhere. Because apparently she had a bowel obstruction brought on by this Crohn's disease. And there was a section of her intestines that had swollen up 4 inches in diameter.
Wow.
And she was enduring the pain of this throughout the shooting of the movie and even after they had wrapped. And she was not telling, she didn't want to worry her mother until this eventually, I mean, what a unbelievable for a 12-year-old.
The show must go on. Child actor.
I tell you what. And then, it got so bad that eventually she collapsed, and this was the end result, as that she died. Now, you and I visited Heather O'Rourke's grave in Westwood Cemetery, mm-hmm. which is a very odd cemetery. A lot of people are buried there. Marilyn Monroe, one of my personal heroes, John Cassavetes.
Don Knotts.
Walter Matthau, another very important person in my life.
Truman Capote.
Also Dean Martin.
Dean Martin.
We'll just go through everybody.
We're just going to go list off all the.
Jack Lemmon is there.
But it is kind of weird because you see just all these high-rise, these buildings around it. And I remember pictures of when Marilyn's funeral. And then you go in and it looks like it did in those,
Yes.
Because like the chapel is still there. That little,
It's very unusual. It's hard to find if you don't know. Because we were looking for a while. And me, her, and a friend of ours in L.A., and we're driving around. We're like, we're not in downtown, but we're in like a city area, and we're going.
Yeah, we're in Westwood.
Yeah, and we're going. What? It doesn't look like a cemetery anywhere around here. And then you realize, well, the cemetery is just literally tucked in this weird little nook between a bunch of high-rise buildings and behind a parking deck. And you kind of walk down an alley behind a parking deck, and you turn, and there's a cemetery in between it all.
You would never expect a cemetery to be there.
And you walk in there, and literally everybody who was famous is buried there. Uh-huh. And Heather O'Rourke was there. Now, on Poltergeist 3, when they finally did convene in March to do the reshoots, Gary Sherman said he was so devastated by the death of the young star of the movie, he didn't even want to continue the movie. But you have to continue the movie because the movie is already finished practically. So, and obviously no producer in studio is going to let you shut down the movie and not release it. So begrudgingly, Gary Sherman went forward and did the reshoots in March. The ending of Poltergeist 3, which was the reshoot done literally a couple months after Heather O'Rourke's death, is really confusing.
Yeah.
And you look at the movie and it's clear that it's a stand-in because you never see her face. Uh-huh. And this was before the technology you have nowadays where you can put Carrie Fisher in the movie. There was no digital anything. No. So frankly, I don't know why they used the reshot ending.
Just release it.
Just release it with the complete ending where Heather O'Rourke is there.
Have they ever released that ending?
You can see it. Yeah, you can look it up. And there's nothing particularly wrong with it. I don't, the whole movie, honestly, compared to the other two, is not very good. And I'm not the first person to point this out.
No, it's not.
It drops in quality significantly.
Yeah.
With Poltergeist 3. One of the things that Roger Ebert used to point this out, and he's totally right in his review for the movie. This movie suffers from the syndrome of everybody calling to everybody else constantly. I mean, there are long scenes and sequences where people are running around through hallways and corridors and upstairs going, Bruce, Patricia, Bruce, Carol Ann, Bruce. And if you walk out of this movie going, I don't know what those characters' names were, there's something wrong with you, because they say each other's names more than any movie I've ever. And watching the movie, you notice it. It's very pronounced.
It is.
And when they were on the set doing multiple takes, people must have been standing around going, how many times is she going to call his name? What's the little girl's name again?
Or maybe they thought, well, maybe they're just filming extra and they're going to cut out some of this. They're going to edit a lot of this down. They just want a lot to edit it down.
If anything, they added to it. Because I swear, if you want to have a good drinking game, watch Poltergeist 3, and every time someone calls someone else's name, take a shot. I guarantee you'll be drunk in 20 minutes. And it's not that long a movie. You'll be totally sloshed. It's really not a very good movie.
Yeah.
Which is a shame, because it was Heather O'Rourke's final film.
She endured pain to be a trooper.
Yeah.
For this.
For that. But as I said, and I'm sure there are some real fiends out there who love Poltergeist 3, but I am not one of them. It was a critical flop, and it grossed like $14 million. So it was not a very successful movie. It has some very interesting, there are a couple of neat scenes in it, and there are some neat ideas, where the ghosts are coming through the mirrors at people and stuff like that, but it's not, I don't know.
Cohesive. Not
really cohesive that much. But eventually they remade Poltergeist in 2015. They remade it with Sam Rockwell, and I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it either. I've never been particularly interested because I saw Poltergeist. That's the thing about the remakes. I kind of already seen this.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to totally shit on all remakes, because sometimes I've seen remakes where you go, yeah, okay. It's maybe not as good as the original, but it's good. It's fine.
I'll bring one up after we're done.
Uh-oh. After we're done, what are they going to think?
Oh,
The Nightmare on Elm Street. Yes, that remake is not a very good remake. Did you watch that?
I did.
What did you think of Nightmare on Elm Street remake?
What was the point?
What did you think of the new Freddy?
No.
You were not a fan of the actor or how it's portrayed? Really? No. Well, the thing about that movie that was really odd, we're talking about Nightmare on Elm Street remake now, is... they almost had the potential to do something interesting.
Yes, but I will agree with that. Yes.
The changes that were made were very odd.
Yes.
And it seemed, and some of the dialogue was really placeholder. You go, did you really expect that to be a good line? There's the Rooney Mara thing where she's standing at the cemetery and she's like, at the very end, she has this horrible line that buttons the scene where it's like, you have no idea what I've been through. It's like, guys, nobody on the set said, hey, we should really stick a better line in there. And honestly, I think Robert Englund said it best when he was asked about the remake. He said, that you never got to know the kids before it went bad. He said that was the thing. In the original films, you got to know in the first act who all the kids were, and you saw them in happier times. Mm-hmm. And then you felt for them when shit hit the fan. In Nightmare on Elm Street, the remake, they're all all messed up, from the beginning and not very likable and so forth.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's a good example. I'll give you an example of a remake that I thought was good. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. The Night of the Living Dead 1990.
Yes, that is a good remake.
I really like it. One. And I think we can agree on that.
Yes, because they did something with Barbara.
Yes, and furthered the whole kind of, all the characters seemed to be a little more developed and had their own little moments here and there. Like Tom in the original Night of the Living Dead was a stick in the mud.
Yes.
And he was much more entertaining.
And his girlfriend, Lord.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I don't know if she was improved in the remake. She was still...
I know, but Lord.
I know what you mean, though. But anyway, back to the Poltergeist thing. Poltergeist, I can't judge that remake because I've never seen it. Maybe it's good, maybe it's not. Let us know what you think of the remake of Poltergeist. Did you like it? If so, why?
And should he watch it? I'm not volunteering.
Oh, yes. Should I? Because she's not going to watch it. Should I watch it? Do you think it's good? Oh, they're thinking about doing another remake of Poltergeist that's going to be directed by the Russo brothers of Avengers fame.
Okay, well that's fine, but it seems like we keep rebooting it. Like every 6 months, we remake and reboot, or we write ourselves out of a plot hole by rebooting or doing some weird thing, and it just. You and I talked about it. It just comes across as lazy.
It's lazy writing. Yeah, because it used to be when you got yourself in a corner as a writer,
figure that out.
You wrote yourself out of it. Now it's just,
or they weren't in the sequel; we were somewhere else.
now it's just we'll start over.
Yeah,
I don't know where to go.
It just seems like every 2 weeks they're rebooting a franchise.
It's something that
gotten a little.
It became a trend, and now it's really irritating.
Yes,
because it's everything just about.
Yes.
And I don't think everything is calling for a remake.
And then they like to reboot stuff that was happy and make it into horror films. That's like the new thing.
Yeah, like Fantasy Island.
Was it Banana Splits?
I don't know about that.
Are they doing? I heard someone was telling me about that one. I don't know if that's true or not.
But Fantasy Island, I heard, was awful.
Yeah.
Did you see it?
No, I saw the trailer and I was like, "This has got to be a joke." Yeah. No, and then I went, "What? That is not Fantasy Island. I want to see Tattoo go the plane.
Yeah, and I'm sure they made some sort of goofy joke about the plane.
I'm sure they did.
That nobody thought was funny.
Someone was being really smug and over-aware when they said it.
Yeah, it's very urbane, Rebecca. Very urbane. That's so slick. See what they did there? There's a lot of that in movies, too.
It's annoying.
Yeah.
And then they have, like, we were talking about this, they have one actor they like to shove down your throat. So they're going to play all the parts.
Mm-hmm. Or musicians.
Yes. Yeah. We should do a show about that.
Yeah. Everybody's getting shoved down your throat. Do you want to say who the musician is or no?
I'll let you say it.
No, I don't know if I want to say it. I might get burned alive. People might come after me with torches.
We should do a show about the song that we're talking about.
Yeah, we reveal who we're talking about when we talk about
the big reveal.
Yeah, but people probably have a similar opinion.
Yeah,
honestly,
it's just right now you're not supposed to have that opinion.
Yes, because it's very dangerous to have that opinion.
Yes. You're supposed to be very moved and think this person is the greatest thing since sliced bread.
Yeah,
and I'm just confused. Yeah. You can boomer me all you want.
Okay, boomer.
That is so annoying. Okay.
It's like, call me that if you like. I don't care. Anyway, so Poltergeist.
Yes.
Really we go off down crazy tangents.
This is us talking on a regular day.
Oh, but you know what? We were talking earlier about Tobe Hooper and his one masterpiece, Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
I was going to say Life Force one.
Yeah. Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The remake of that, the first one, because they seem to remake that, pathologically. But the very first remake of that Marcus Nespel directed, I think is a really scary movie. Mm-hmm. I think that's a good remake. Mm-hmm. Other people have criticized it because of the visual scheme, and they say it's brown to green, stuff like that. And I can understand that. It's sort of Marcus Nespel's look. But quality-wise, I think it's great. And I think the addition of R. Lee Ermey's character was really good. That was a great addition to that story because he steals the show, totally, R. Lee Ermey in the remake of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Now, I haven't liked any of the ones they've done since then. But I thought that one remake was actually really good. Mm-hmm. So I can't say across the board that I don't like remakes because that's disingenuous. It really is based on what it is. As an idea, I'm kind of tired of them because I think if we've had enough.
And it's also, should I even breach the subject?
Now you have me fascinated.
Well, you'd get a script and then you'd read it and you'd go, oh, it's just Texas Chainsaw, but they just changed this. Or, I understand it's very influential, but I mean, every movie can't be. Mm-hmm, do you know what I'm saying? And they're like not really good movies. They're just really.
The drop in quality.
Yeah, yeah. But the person obviously was like, oh, I'm doing my version.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Of Texas Chainsaw, but I'm adding this element to it. Aren't I clever? And they're usually garbage movies.
Right. Because you can't copy something repeatedly.
No.
Because it's like if you put something in an old Xerox, the more copies you make of the copy, the duller the image becomes.
And the reason why that movie had such an impact is because
it was new.
No one had ever seen anything like it.
I think that's absolutely right. I remember people talking about the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre who went to see it in drive-ins in 1974 and 5. And they said it was such a shocking experience. They'd never seen anything like that before. And that's what made it such a hit and so memorable for so many people, is it was so different. And I think, as much as I was talking about Tobe before, his sensibility made that movie different because it was a Tobe Hooper movie.
And it worked.
Yes. And that
other type of films that doesn't work.
I don't know if Tobe did well with bigger budgets. That's when you started to get into weird shit, because then Tobe's just like coming up with all
He
kinds
doesn't
of
have
shit.
anything to rein him in.
Right.
It's like, we don't have money. Oh, okay, then we can't do it.
He needs a Spielberg to say, Tobe, we are not doing that. We're not having the girl wife. We're not having Steve Railsback say, she's a masochist. She wants me to hit her. She wants me to hit her.
That's
like,
right.
No.
Naked vampire.
Yeah.
We want a dancer to play her, so she toes perfectly point when she's walking down the steps.
And if you remember the scenes in Life Force with the naked dudes, you never see any of them.
I know.
And they get.
I felt gypped. No, I'm good.
And they get. And they're instantly blown up. Like Tobe is not interested in them being in this story.
I'm just surprised he didn't do all women. It's just like a whole tribe of naked women vampires.
Yeah. Well, they probably, the screenwriters put the guys in there, and Tobe's like, we got to fix this. Blow them up. He got no problem showing every inch of Matilda's body. But anyway, so that's our story. That's our show about Poltergeist.
And other things.
And remakes and Tobe Hooper and all kinds of
and the things. Mystery musician. If you'd like to take a guess, leave it in the comments.
But let me say this before we end, since the title of this video is the Poltergeist Curse.
Yes.
Do you think that these movies were cursed? I don't either. You know why? Because I don't believe in the supernatural. And if you don't believe in the supernatural, you don't believe in curses. So anyway,
now this is the start of your horror movie.
How do you mean?
This is how yours start. I don't believe in the supernatural, and then tonight.
Right. Then shit hits the fan.
Shit hits the fan. He opened the portal.
I've created my own inciting incident.
That's right.
We'll tell you how it goes next week. So anyway, yes, thanks for joining us this week. Next week, we'll be back with another show. On behalf of Rebecca Ivey and myself, I want to thank you and say take care of yourselves.
Yeah.